Good morning. Today I'll be covering chapter 37 and 38 of Genesis, and then going back over and reading the notes for each of those sections. Alright, getting started will be the story of Joseph, which will start in chapter 37 and go all the way till chapter 50. Joseph is sold into slavery. Joseph's dreams, chapter 37. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Israel is Jacob, by the way, if you don't remember, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had to say. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Alright, Joseph sold by his brothers. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to them, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him, and we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. The camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. All right, that is chapter 37. On for the notes. Okay, we'll be starting with verse 3. and that is, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And it says, in Joseph's day, everyone had a robe that was worn as a primary outer garment. These were put to many uses, including bundling up belongings for a trip, wrapping up babies as a blanket to sit on, or even to serve as security for a loan. Most robes are knee-length, short-sleeved, and plain. In contrast, Joseph's robe was probably like the kind worn by royalty, ankle-length, long-sleeved, and colorful. This robe became a symbol of Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph, and it aggravated the already strained relations between Joseph and his brothers. Favoritism and feelings may be unavoidable, but its divisive effects should be minimized. Parents may not be able to change their feelings toward a favorite child, but they can choose to act wisely and fairly with all their children. Yeah. Okay, next we have from verse 6 to 11, and that's Joseph talking about his dreams. It says, Joseph's brothers are already angry over the possibility of being ruled by their little brother. Joseph, still young and probably immature, then seems to have fueled the fire with his attitude and boastful manner. No one enjoys a braggart. Joseph learned this the hard way. His angry brothers sold him into slavery to get rid of him. After several years of hardship, Joseph learned an important lesson. Because our talents and knowledge came from God, it is more appropriate to thank Him for them than to brag about them. Later, Joseph gave God the credit in chapter 41, verse 16, if you want to go read ahead. Okay, next is verse 19 to 20. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. And it says, can you imagine feeling so jealous that you wanted to kill someone? Before saying, of course, look at what happened in this story. These men were willing to kill their younger brother over a robe and a few reported dreams. Their deep jealousy had grown into ugly rage, completely blinding them to what was right. Jealousy can be difficult to recognize because our reasons for it seem to make sense. But left unchecked, jealousy grows quickly and leads to serious sins. The longer you cultivate jealous feelings, the harder it is to uproot them. The time to deal with jealousy is when you notice yourself keeping score of others' recognition, awards, and achievements. Okay, next we have verse 26 to verse 27. That is, Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. It says the brothers were worried about being the guilt of Joseph's death. Judah suggested an option that was not right, but would leave them innocent of murder. Sometimes we jump at a solution because it is the lesser of two evils, even though it is still not right. It's still not the right action to take. When someone proposes a seemingly workable solution, first ask, is it right? Okay, next is just verse 28, and that was, so the Midianite merchants came by. His brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And it says, although Joseph's brothers didn't kill him outright, they probably didn't expect him to survive for long as a slave. They were quite willing to let cruel slave traders do their dirty work for them. Joseph faced a 30-day journey through the desert, probably chained and on foot. He would be treated like baggage and, once in Egypt, would be sold as a piece of merchandise. His brothers thought they would never see him again, but God was in control of Joseph's life and had other plans. Okay, next up is verse 29 to 30. And that's going to be, when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes and he went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? And it says, Reuben returned to the cistern to find Joseph, but his little brother was gone. His first response, in effect, was, what will happen to me, rather than what will happen to Joseph? In a tough situation, are you usually concerned first about yourself? Consider the person most affected by the problem, and you will be more likely to find a solution for it. Okay, next we have verse 31 to 35. And that is the son showing Jacob the robe. And it says, to cover the evil action, Jacob's sons deceived their father into thinking Joseph was dead. Jacob himself had deceived others many times, including his own father, back in chapter 27, verse 35. Even though he didn't know it at this point, Jacob was learning by hard experience the painfulness and destructive consequences of deceit. And next we have verse 34. And that is, then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. And it says, tearing one's clothes and wearing burlap, often called sackcloth, were signs of mourning, much like wearing black today. Okay, last one from 37 is verse 36. And it says, meanwhile the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. And it says, imagine the culture shock Joseph experienced upon arriving in Egypt. Joseph had lived as a nomad, traveling the countryside with his family, caring for sheep. Suddenly he was thrust into the world's most advanced civilization with great pyramids, beautiful homes, sophisticated people, and a new language. While Joseph saw the Egyptians' skill and intelligence at their best, he also saw their spiritual blindness. They worship countless gods related to every aspect of life. Alright, now that is the end of 37. Excuse me. Next up is chapter 38, Judah and Tamar. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kizib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife of his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Nain, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand. She answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute, who is beside the road at Nain? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these. Oh, I skipped over the part. Prostituting, and as a result, she is not pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah, and he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. Right, that was chapter 38. Time for its notes. Okay, we'll be starting with the whole chapter, verse 1 to verse 30. It says, this chapter vividly contrasts the immoral character of Judah with the moral character of Joseph. Judah's lack of integrity resulted in family strife and deception. Genesis 39 shows how Joseph's integrity and wise choices reflected his godly character. His faithfulness was rewarded with blessings greater than he could imagine, both for himself and for his family. Alright, verse 8 to 10. And it says, then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. And it says, this law about marrying a widow in the family is explained in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 to 10. Its purpose was to ensure that a childless widow would have a son who would receive her late husband's inheritance, and who, in turn, would care for her. Because Judah's son Tamar's husband, had no children, there is no family line through which the inheritance and the blessing of the covenant of God could continue. God killed Onan because he refused to fulfill his obligation to his brother and to Tamar. Alright. Okay, next is verses 15 to 24. And that is Tamar becoming a prostitute and sleeping with Judah. While I was Judah, so willing to sleep with a prostitute, yet ready to execute his daughter-in-law for being one. To understand this apparent contradiction, we must understand the place of women in Canaan. A woman's most important function was seen as bearing children, who would perpetuate the family line, to ensure that children belonged to her husband. A bride was expected to be a virgin, and a wife was expected to have relations with only him. If a wife committed adultery, she could be executed. Some women, however, did not belong to families. They might serve as shrine prostitutes, supported by offerings, or common prostitutes, supported by the men who used their services. The children were nobody's heirs, and men who hired them adulterated no one's bloodlines. Judah saw no harm in hiring a prostitute for a night. After all, he was more than willing to pay. He was ready to execute Tamar. However, because if she was pregnant as a result of prostitution, his grandchild would not be part of his family line. Apparently, the question of sexual morality would never entered Judah's mind. His concern was with keeping his inheritance in the family. Ironically, it was Tamar, not Judah, who acted to provide him with legal heirs. By seducing him, she acted more in the sphere of the law than he did when he refused to send his third son to her. This event in no way implies that God thinks lightly of prostitution. Throughout Scripture, prostitution is condemned as a serious sin. If the story has a moral, it is that faithfulness to family obligations is important, and despite their failures, Judah and Tamar are direct ancestors of Jesus Christ. See Matthew 1, verse 3 for that. Okay, next is verse 15 to 23. So same little bit there. It may seem strange that prostitution is written about in such a matter-of-fact way here. Prostitutes were common in pagan cultures such as that of Canaan. Public prostitutes served Canaanites goddesses. Prostitutes were common in pagan cultures such as that of Canaan. Public prostitutes served Canaanite goddesses and were a common element of the religious cults. Fornication was encouraged in these cults with the belief that it would improve fertility in crops and flocks. Public prostitutes were more acceptable in that culture than private prostitutes, who were sometimes punished when caught. Alright, next is verse 18 only. And that was, he said, "What pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. And it says this identification seal was used to authenticate legal documents, usually a unique design carved in stone and worn on a ring or necklace, inseparable from its owner. The seal was used by the wealthy and powerful to mark clay or wax. Because Tamar had Judah's seal, she could prove beyond a doubt that he had been with her. Okay, last one for chapter 38 is going to be over verse 24 to verse 26. And that says, about 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she had, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I will give her to my son Shiloh." And he did not sleep with her again. Sorry, y'all, I'm struggling now. Okay. And it says for this last part that when Tamar revealed she was pregnant, Judah, who unknowingly had gotten her pregnant, moved to have her killed. Judah had no regret over his own sexual sin, yet he came down harshly on Tamar for hers. Often the sins that anger us most when we see them in others are the same sins we commit, yet don't notice in ourselves. If you become indignant at the sins of others, you may have a similar tendency to sin that you don't wish to face. The next time you become angry at someone else's sin, ask yourself honestly if you are sinning in that same area. If you are humbly admit it and confess it to God. When we admit our sins and ask God to forgive us, forgiving others become easier. All right, that is the end of chapter 38 of Genesis. Tomorrow will be chapter 39 and chapter 40 of Genesis. Have a great day.